Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we wish to discuss with you a subject that we have not dealt with before in this program, and that has to do with looking into the intricacies of institutions or corporations, particularly addressing the responsibilities of the boards of directors, spotting problems in organizations before they become too serious, or in the growth process of organizations. How can those who are in charge of policy making make that transition as smoothly and as helpful to the entire personnel? This is kind of an overview of the topic, and we have a very qualified guest to address this issue. I welcome to the program Dr. Keller Rogers. She wears many different hats, and we've dealt with her in other aspects of issues before. Dr. Rogers holds a doctorate in the field of adult learning, and she also is licensed in social work and has a private practice in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Dr. Rogers, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And I'm very happy to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I shall ask Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Dr. Rogers, it's my understanding that you do retreats and that sort of thing for people who are in corporations so that they might get together and, I suppose, discuss their problems or maybe work toward common goals. What is the purpose of such retreats, and how do you, what kind of a schedule do you have on those kinds of retreats?
Well, I think retreats are only one of the myriad of tools for organizations to use when they find themselves either wanting to enhance an already well-functioning team or to do some troubleshooting within organizational issues or personnel issues that they might be experiencing. One of the things that takes place in a retreat setting is that, at least when an organization hires me to do those kinds of things, one thing I don't do is just to say, okay, let's all meet on a mountaintop somewhere and decide what we're going to do here. What I usually do is an in-depth analysis of what kind of an organization, whether it's private industry, profit, or not-for-profit, if it has a board or board of directors or trustee as part of it, in looking at a lot of productivity issues, in reviewing job descriptions, organizational flowcharts, those kinds of things, and really familiarizing myself with what the organization is and what it does, as well as being very, very clear on what kinds of outcomes people wish to have in a retreat setting. I think probably one of the most discouraging things, and certainly something that I've participated in, is when either in a retreat setting or a series of meetings, say management and staff get together and do a lot of in-depth planning and put a lot of really concerted effort in that, and then lo and behold, nothing changes. I work a lot with organizations that are bureaucratically organized, and at least at this point in my professional life, I refer to myself as a recovering bureaucrat. So I use my recovering bureaucrat status as an information and personal experience part in terms of dealing with people who work in bureaucratic kinds of settings with the kinds of frustrations that they have.
I want to go back. I have a little advantage in the fact that I have worked with Dr. Rogers in this field a little bit. I've watched her work. I haven't worked with her, but I have observed her work. Oftentimes you'll be called in to assist an organization because there are already problems. People tend not to call in experts until they're in trouble. So I'd like to think of you as a troubleshooter and to try to be helpful to our viewers, and that's always our main focus, is to educate the best we can. What can you share with those that might be watching that work in profit or non-profit corporations or business corporations? If you're called in, or if someone else is called in, or even if we don't go for a troubleshooter and we're talking about someone who's working within an institution, what are some of the signs? What to look for? What points to trouble ahead for that organization? And also share with us some of the things that are a positive sign that the organization and its personnel is headed for more positive accomplishments.
Okay.
It's a very involved question.
Yeah, very involved. Organizations have developmental processes like we all do, like human development process. And that in that process there are some things that, to use vernacular that's relatively trendy in my therapy business, it become dysfunctional. And within organizations, being able to spot those things as they occur, and they look very much like other systems, like family systems or government systems or systems of higher education or a lot of other systems kinds of things. And some of those signs and symptoms are related to the ability to be open to change, being the ability to be able to take risks, and the freedom to fail or appear foolish and learn from those kinds of things. Organizations, when they become dysfunctional or ill or not producing, are ones that become isolated, that their boundaries are very rigid, that they begin not taking data or input from the outside, that their energy is not congruent with the stated goals of the organization, that there's a lot of secrecy. The employees will say, well, if we can just figure out what's going on, then everything will be okay. They're usually an organization that has a lot of chaotic behavior. That is the only time that's really called time out on is when there's a crisis. And the crisis is usually either created or allowed to occur to take away from the chaos. A lot of secrets. Management doesn't let employees know what they're doing, and employees don't let management know what they're doing. The expectation is that you choose sides, that that you need to either be on this employee side or this management side, or even among and within management or employees, that there's a lot of dualism, a lot of side taking. Low trust, low risk, really rigid.
Let me pursue that a little bit further. It seems to me, with my limited exposure to a number of different organizations, that too oftentimes, as you are growing or change is coming, my interpretation is that some people feel that you must make almost an immediate decision because there's a demand for some change gradually. I guess what I'm trying to say is, as a non-expert in this field, isn't one of the dangers within an organization is to not be methodical, not take your time to do your homework, not to do all the research, and make what I would call impulsive decisions, yet those decisions have great consequences to that organization for many years down the road. I guess it's a very long involved question, but is there a problem of being too impulsive in decision making and not being visionary with that decision?
Well, I think that one of the things that our businesses reflect is essentially what happens in our society. And that our society are lots of great and grand things and lots of things that aren't so great and grand. And one of the things that I think is really erosive to organizations is the quick fix. That if we replace that person, or we change this set of guidelines, or we change this job description, then everything's going to be okay. And that what we fail to look at is a global view of what also goes on, which I think you were referring to as sort of the long run. That, if you look at any system, when you affect one part of it, it affects the entire system. And sometimes that does mean for years and years and years to come, particularly service delivery oriented or product delivery oriented, in terms of making decisions about inferior products and then putting on a good hype so that people buy them even when they're inferior. In service delivery organizations, say like in healthcare or social services or those kinds of things, that the quick fix usually means personnel change. And that whenever an organization grows, they have, growth is painful, growth has change in it. And one of the things that an organization does to become healthy, or management does to encourage health, is to embrace change as the rule of course, rather than something you have to put up with at every time a problem is surfaced, then we'll put up with the change, but not embracing surfacing the problems and embracing the change.
Janelle Burke.
Does it really help to talk about things? Does it really help?
Or does it just
fester?
I have a saying that I use a lot, both in organizations and in private counseling, that once it's surfaced and labeled, it loses its power to erode. And what that means is that once it's out and breathing in the light of day, that it's something that becomes tangible and something to work on, rather than a set of assumptions or internal feelings related to something that's never been labeled. So yeah, it helps to talk.
Now, are we going to see if once we've talked about it, are we going to see that there is an improvement, do you think?
It's my recovering bureaucrat status is having a lump here. Could I have some water? When it's talked about, I think it has a good chance of being dealt with. And when it's not talked about, it has very little chance of being dealt with.
So sometimes when we have group meetings and that sort of thing, does the productivity pick up afterwards?
It depends on whether there's any outcome from the group meetings. That one of the things that you want, that I'm very clear about, is what are the outcomes? What do you wish to happen as a result of whatever intervention that's happening? And that one of the things I'm very clear about in working with any organization is that I will not participate in headhunting. Because sometimes when there's problems within an organization, they'll hire an outside person to come in and axe the people, and that's something that I'm very clear with. That within systems, whether the system be family or organization, that empowering people to move into a problem-solving mode rather than, say, a quick fix, is one that is truly the rising tide that floats all ships, because it allows people to feel very powerful in terms of being able to manage their own problems, rather than, if you'll just go away and get changed or remove this person, then we'll be just fine.
I would like to pursue that a little bit further, and we're dealing with the problems of dealing with personnel and this whole business of trust. Oftentimes an organization is in lots of trouble. It may be a reduction in funding, and therefore that's going to affect the organization. It may be a conflict between personnel and management and the governing board. And as those things escalate and proceed to be a greater problem, I'm wondering if the level of mistrust reaches the point to where you just get trapped into scapegoating and trying to blame some other individuals and trying to survive yourself within the organization. Is that a real serious problem?
Anytime there's any conflict, one of the things, whether it's produced by reduction in force or expanded growth or changing in funding, and it really doesn't matter. It doesn't seem whether the funding is being cut or you're getting a whole bunch of money. That any of those changes, that people begin to react to that change, and there's always conflict. Conflict is a real celebrated issue in terms of there isn't ever any change without conflict. But most people in conflict will say, as I mentioned before, if you'll just go away and do something different or get fixed, or it must be your fault because I'm feeling not okay about what's happening, rather than their ability to look at how they've positioned themselves within the organization or within that problem construct, and saying, how can we align our forces and move forward? Once the trust issue is breached, in other words, I have lost trust in you, for instance, and you might be my CEO or a coworker. To recapture that trust is very, very difficult, as it is in any relationship. And most things that erode that trust are secrets. That I think that you must be not telling me something that I need to know in order for us to work together or this organization to be successful. And the other part is that there is no ultimate truth. That if I perceive that you're withholding information for me or that you're not trustworthy, based on my perception, it's true, and you won't be able to out-fact me. In other words, if I get that perception and you say, see, this is not true, you know, your perception is wrong, and these are the facts that support it, I may or may not still be able to trust you, even though, you know, you might have proved that you were trustworthy.
There's a really a problem, isn't there, too, when you're having conflict in an organization, or even maybe chaos in some cases, that if you try to do a fix just with media management or with the board, or don't you have to include all components if you have much of a chance of resolving that conflict? Because aren't all parties important to that resolution?
All parties are part or important to the resolution. However, if you subscribe to the systems theory, you can affect one part of the system and have it, you know, intervene with one part of the system and have it affect the entire system. And the reason I'm relatively hesitant, I'm thinking about experiences where including the entire organization was not a good decision in terms of moving forward. That it's like, I use another analogy, it's like parents call me and say, well, my kids need therapy. And so I say, okay. And so they bring them into a therapeutic setting. And I talk to the kids, and they would benefit from having therapy. But the issue is the parents' ability to provide parameters for them to feel successful or wanted or encouraged or affirmed or whatever. So often what I'll do in that situation is that I will talk with the parents, and when the parents get their act together, lo and behold, the kids' lives get better. And that if you use that analogy in an organizational setting, let's say the CEO is the parent of the organization, whether it's a board-driven organization or not. And when, you know, often the intervention needs to be with the person that provides the parameters for that organization, much like a parent would. Not in terms of being parental, but in terms of what are the expectations, how do I get appreciation for a job well done, those kinds of things. And so a long way in answering your question, that it really depends on the situation, whether all of the players are part of what you do in the problem solving, or that it's just key people within the organization.
It's not as simple as I wanted it to be.
No. Well, we could make it simple, and then that could move into the quick fix.
Yes, and then create other problems. Mm-hmm. Janelle Burke.
I would like to talk a little bit about the personalities of various people and what is successful and what isn't successful. What personalities do you generally find? When you do a workshop or a retreat, do you find that there are some very strong personalities that immediately surface and some people who are more quiet and eventually manage to focus the group in another direction? What do you find with respect to personalities?
One of the major themes in all of the service delivery that I've been involved in, and one that's really a major theme in my personal life as well, is the whole issue of celebrating differences. And that when I go into organizations, one of the things that I always do is taking a look at being able to look at each other's differences not as flaws or something to be changed, but just different. And how in certain kinds of situations, in problem-solving situations or in manufacturing situations or whatever it is, that all of the different types of personalities are important. If certainly are, like say with data like Keirsey temperament sorter or like a Myers-Briggs data. Myers-Briggs looks at existing motivational characteristics, and it's cross-referenced with the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. So if you take this test and you score in some areas and you look at the kinds of jobs that at least according to this data that you would experience success in, you would see types of personalities that are related to certain kinds of jobs within organizations or playing different kinds of roles. I'm not sure that there is that regardless of what kind of personality type you have or how you score, say, on that Myers-Briggs, that it doesn't mean there is something that you can't do. All it means is that you may pay more emotional freight than someone who is motivationally wired to do those kinds of things. So that I keep thinking about old data like type A behavior or type B behavior or those kinds of things. And I think that the type A behavior in the old vernacular were people who were disguised workaholic people. And unfortunately, in our society, a lot of our organizations demand some real dysfunctional behavior in order to be successful. And an organization that encourages a person to override what they know is okay for them and in terms of what the organizational or what they should be doing according to the organization is one that that will ultimately not be successful as an organization, but at best is a pretty sick or not okay place to be.
Are there different kinds of leadership types? Or do people with great leadership potential generally follow the same kinds of a form?
I think it's my social worker heart that can never give simple answers to things. I keep thinking about leadership in what capacity. If I were looking at leader within a battle or a war or those kinds of things, those leadership characteristics would be different than the leadership characteristics, say, within an organization that is service-oriented, health service or social service-oriented.
And so you might need different characteristics, too, for a volunteer organization as opposed to a professional organization.
I don't believe so. I think that what volunteer organizations... Are you talking about volunteers within an organization or like a heart foundation or something?
I'm talking about like a heart foundation. The people who sit on boards there as opposed to, say, corporation boards.
I think that's a common thought, but the more that I work with boards particularly, regardless of what their outcome is, the more I realize the need for certain types of positions on that board. Certainly if the board expertise needs to be at least somewhat knowledgeable about what the service of the organization is. But in terms of the configuration of a board and what makes them work and function well as a board is for them to understand what it means to be a good board person. So boards training, for instance, on how can I be an effective board member, whether it's with an all-volunteer organization or with a multi-million-dollar executive board or a foundation board for a large corporate entity. I think the key with that is how can I function best as a board member rather than the type of leadership or positions and what they do, I think that's much more important.
I want to follow up what Janelle is saying in relation to boards. And my experience is limited, but I've served on some boards, and what comes home to me, and if I'm all off basis, please indicate so, but it seems to me that boards, in addition to trying to have some knowledge of what the mission of the organization is and getting that clear, that they have, as I perceive, as their number one problem is what involvement should they have inside the organization on like a daily basis. And it seems to me that there's two extremes, and I'd like to get you to react to that. And one is a board who's been sold the idea or belief that they should never, under any circumstances, talk with anyone except the CEO or keep a great distance, and they don't know a lot of the intricacies. In other words, kind of like the President of the United States, some of them have isolated themselves to their chief of staff and they don't talk with other staff. And the other extreme is being there every day, intervening with the staff on every decision. Are both those extremes a very dangerous thing? Or I guess my other way of asking the question is, how does a board do the right thing of balancing having all the information they need to make decisions, but also have some faith in their administrators?
Okay. I think one of the key things to understand about boards, for, say, not-for-profit organizations, is that they're mandated to guard the public trust. In other words, they're the people who make sure that the organization represents itself in the way that it was incorporated to do. What that means is that policy is their purview and the thing that they're in charge of doing, and that the policy for the organization is set by the board, and the board has authorization, by the Articles of Incorporation and all of those other things to carry that out. And let's take a look at that in speaking to your two extremes. There's one extreme which, if there is an extreme to be had, I think it's the first one that you described, is where the board only speaks with the CEO regarding the day-to-day operation and uses that data to make decisions. Rather than, if I were going to choose between those extremes for one, I'd rather than a board who involves themselves into day-to-day operation of what happens within the organization. The balanced board is one that has free access to all players within the organization, has interaction with them, but never intervenes unless they do through the CEO or the management type of thing within the organization. But their major mission still is to set policy of what happens with the organization.
With that, I'm going to bring our program to a conclusion. I have a couple of things I want to say, but before we go off the air. But Dr. Carolyn Rogers, thank you. You really have informed us a lot of things that one should look at in organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm cutting the program short a little bit today because I wanted to inform you that this concludes the 18th year of the North Idaho College Public Forum. We look forward to being with you again next week, starting our 19th year. But I have some people I want to thank, because you cannot stay on the air this long without a tremendous amount of support and what Dr. Rogers has been talking about today. First of all, I'd like to thank our panelist, Janelle Burke. If my memory is correct, this is her 16th year that she has concluded on this forum, and she's been just such a great support to the whole program and is available many hours without even a lot of notice, and she has a very busy schedule. I want to thank also Steve Schenck, who is also a regular panelist and is the Dean of College Relations and Development at our college. He too spends many, many hours on this. And there's all those behind the scenes that you don't see, but one of those very professional people is Michael J. Miller, who is on the staff at North Idaho College. He's the director of all media operations, which includes educational television, it includes our telecommunications system, and our audio-visual work. And without his professionalism, we could not do what we do. And we're saying goodbye today to Becky Helpner, who has been what I would call the executive producer of this program. She trains the students, and along with Michael J. Miller, and has been a great, great assistance to us all year, and has spent numerous hours with this program as well as other activities. And I also want to thank the students that have been with us during our 18th year. They are students at North Idaho College, and they do run the cameras, and they do all the technical aspects in the control room. And there are not many institutions in this country where students are doing all the technical aspects, and we're grateful for what they do and also the courses they take at North Idaho College. And with that, I conclude our 18th year with you. We hope it's been a very productive one for you. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at the same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.